This is Cedarburg Public Library and CPL Radio, and of course, that means this is New Book Tuesday, our premiere. This isn't our premiere show. We've been doing this for a while, but this is our premiere show that talks about new arrivals in this particular library on extremely busy Hanover Avenue. So, welcome. I'm Jeff Messerman, Adult Services Librarian, who can be found upstairs near the Adult Snack Bar. Go ahead, everybody. Introduce yourselves.
I'm Casey St. Clair, head of the Children's Department.
I'm Heidi Griffin, also in the Children's Department.
I'm Gemma Lavender. I'm upstairs in the Adult Services.
And they all want to get into the Adult Snack Bar. So I hear. Anyway, it's a running joke that none of you who are listening have any idea what we're talking about. Anyway.
Overall, librarians love snacks.
Yes.
Please bring them in.
If you need context,
For us.
that's all you need to hear. Anyway, we're going to talk about not snacks, but books. And we're going to start with Casey this week. And away she goes.
Right on. Let me brush the crumbs off of my book. I read a graphic novel called Freshman Year by Sarah Mai. And it is a young adult book specifically for high schoolers going into college or adults who want to reflect on their college years. I would say that's a perfect target audience. It is about a main character named Sarah who is leaving suburban Wisconsin, something we have in common, for her freshman year at the University of Minnesota. She has really high hopes for the first year of college. She and her friends are so excited. They're sitting around the campfire talking about what the next year will bring. And this graphic novel chronicles that first year. Something that is super cool is the author definitely went to the high school I went to. So the first pages, you see Sarah graduating, and I went, oh, that looks kind of similar to the gymnasium, Homestead High School. But I couldn't say for certain. And then there are a few more hints in the book that definitely give away. For instance, they go to Chuck's and then have a bonfire down on the river.
Oh, Chuck's.
Chuck's
how I
place.
love Chuck's.
Yes. And I also want to chime in that Heidi read this book too.
Yeah.
So I think it is super well done, regardless of my ties to the author, whom I don't know personally. I think she's a few years older, and the Wisconsin aspect, but I think it's a great book, and I chose it because of the cover. The girl looked really relatable. She's got Birkenstocks, orange overalls. She looks disheveled and just kind of like, where am I? Which I can relate to.
It looks like she's in a library, actually.
She's in a dorm room.
Oh, it's a dorm room. Oh, I thought it was a library, but that's, yeah.
Well, the bunk beds are so close together. They look like stacks.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just projecting library everywhere. I see.
Gemma closes her eyes and all she sees is books.
And stacks.
Gemma needs a vacation day.
Some of the trials and tribulations that she goes through are deciding whether or not to continue the relationship with her high school boyfriend, deciding on a major, dealing with a roommate who is hyper, for lack of a better word, anal and just on top of things. And then kind of discovering that maybe she's not so put together as she looks and that a lot of people on the campus have similar problems to her. So I wish this book existed when I was going into my freshman year of college.
Would have been nice.
It would have been nice. My one critique for the art style, the art is super cool and I love the facial expressions of her characters. She has like 9 varieties of anxiety that she does really well for people's faces. However, it's only black, white, and gray, or sort of a bluish gray that Heidi pointed out kind of looks like colors of a dream.
Yeah, it's like she's having a dream montage through the whole book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So maybe some color would have made it pop, but overall, highly recommend.
I can tell you the color choice probably, just having a illustrator in the family now over at my ad, I can tell you the color choice may have been made just because it's really hard to find. If you're self-published or if you're, first time out, it's really hard to find a good colorist. You kind of have to, if you're doing it yourself, you have no choice but to or... Yeah, it may have been a choice. It may have been a creative choice, but and maybe the dreamlike state is also she's probably far enough removed that it feels like a dream. So that's possible. So that is, But anyway, writing to the defense of artists nationwide. This is me.
That's good to know. Remember when picture books could only be like 2 colors?
Yeah. I was wondering if it was a cost thing.
Yeah,
it happens. Yeah.
Absolutely. I do think it's a great gift for someone to give their soon-to-be freshman college students.
Yeah. Oh, I should have talked about this during the height of graduation season.
Yeah.
Grad parties. That's a good idea.
Well,
Yeah.
August is coming, and you can drop that in juniors' bag as they take off for
Yeah.
You're wiping away your tears.
Yeah,
for the halls of Ivy. Yes. So there we go.
Anyway, Freshman
Excellent.
Year by Sarah Mai
It's
on
here.
our shelves.
All right, fantastic. Moving on to a guy named Jeff. Hi. I read this week, actually over this past month, something that our delightful Sarah Kelly got for me. You remember Sarah?
The one who skydives.
She does a lot, right? Yes. I won't even tell you what she's doing right now. I've been sworn to secrecy. But this is something called A Paper Orchestra by a gentleman named Michael Jamin. It would be comparable, I suppose, to a David Sedaris book. It's a series of humorous personal anecdotes, basically. The subtitle under the title is A Paper Orchestra. What of the smallest, almost forgotten moments were the ones that shaped us most? And it's pretty interesting. All true stories from his life. The reason and Michael is by trade a TV and screenwriter, so I've known about him for a long time, of course, because I foolishly hear from my roost in Wisconsin, keep tabs on the screenplay world, and he's worked on some big stuff. He did King of the Hill episodes, and he's worked on Beavis and Butthead, of course, because those are both the same same shop those two come out of. What else lately? Rules of Engagement, a show I know nothing about. Out of Practice, Just Shoot Me. He worked on that for a while, which actually is a really funny show. And comedian Mark Maron has a show that's out there, and I guess Michael's written for that too, as well as Tacoma FD. I don't know anything about that show either. I probably should get out more. Casey's going to make me watch more television soon, I hear. Anyway, so again, comparable to David Sedaris, it's a series of, snippets from his childhood and years in college, earliest days as a Hollywood screenwriter. And Michael and I probably born around the same time, so these stories all absolutely hit home, and I think Michael and I have similar anxieties, similar failures, similar horror stories, and all of it was great. If you were born around, if you're Gen X, this collection of essays, personal essays, is for you. And I thought I'd let Mr. Jamin speak instead of me. He's got a wonderful essay called Masks about this is probably, I would say, probably early 80s, I would think. And if you remember the joy and thrill of going shopping around Halloween for your Halloween costume as a young child. And it is joyful, but it also can be absolutely horrible. Everything about it can just go bad. This is one that went bad. But let's start.
Let's hear it.
You can hear his voice, and actually, I kind of do a good Michael Jamin impression again. So, and I know his the flow. So I'll give my best Michael Jamin impression. So I won't exactly sound like me when I read this, or maybe I will. When I was young, there was a particular children's cartoon about a special little boy. He didn't have a rare talent or an advanced intellect, but he was dead. And that did make him stand out. Despite being a ghost, which would undoubtedly cause most people to bemoan the cruelty of their untimely demise, this young lad was surprisingly chipper. In fact, he only wanted to focus on one thing, spreading good cheer. Heartbreaking, really. The show is called Casper the Friendly Ghost, and the creators were quick to add the qualifier friendly, so that overly sensitive children like myself wouldn't shit themselves out of fear. It was reassuring to know that this ghost didn't want to drag me to the underworld, unlike the ghost lurking inside the steamer trunk my parents kept in the basement. As a television writer, it's hard for me to imagine how this show got sold. If I tried to pitch it, I'm certain TV executives would put me through the ringer. So this dead kid, what hilarious way did he die? Leukemia? Sudden infant death syndrome? My plan is never to address that. And his parents, they're inconsolable, right? Absolutely devastated. I have a happy spin on that. They died when he was a baby. Yeah, that's a pass. Yet somehow Casper the Friendly Ghost was greenlit and became a mainstay of pop culture. Growing up, I watched every episode having decided that it was the right level of terrifying for me, which is to say, as scary as a glass of milk. As a child, I wasn't just afraid, I was also afraid of being afraid. I'd bend over backwards so that I wouldn't have to do something even remotely scary. I was almost heroic in that way. My best friend Adam didn't seem to be scared of anything. He bragged about watching The Exorcist and Jaws. Not me, though. I couldn't even watch The Incredible Hulk. And he was a good guy. I guess he was too green for me. Watching Casper allowed me to feign a certain level of machismo. I could tell Adam that I, too, enjoyed watching ghost stories while leaving out the embarrassingly lame details. That's about it for Michael Gemma. These essays are great, and, the tone you just heard is the tone through the whole book. They surprisingly also become very emotional. And there's some very sad moments in here, too, and, parental disappointments, and a very, very bad time when his dad decided he needed to toughen up, and he dropped him off at taekwondo class, and he basically had the crap kicked out of him. Oh, no. Anyway, it was the 80s, and that was okay then. Anyway,
absolutely.
A paper orchestra, Michael Jamin. You're not going to find this anywhere else in the system, because I was aware this. Michael had put a book out, and I begged Sarah to get it because I've always enjoyed his writing and his online web presence. He has a lot of wonderful videos and helpful things for writers. So, Michael Jamin, A Paper Orchestra, available now, as Casey said, at the Cedarburg Public Library. Let's move on over to Gemma. And what do you have today?
I am going through a lot of the big blockbusting bestsellers at the moment. And another huge one that came flying in, I think, end of last year or beginning of this year, Covenant of Water by Verghese. I had actually read his Cutting for Stone, which I adored. And so I was very excited.
Everyone adored it.
Yeah, very excited that he had spent the last probably decade writing a new one. And Covenant of Water did not disappoint. It is, I'm also going through this phase of like summing up a book in one word like I did last time. And this one I would sum up as shimmering.
Ooh. Was a lot of
Can we
water.
add a little chime?
Note to Scott, when you're editing this, add a chime there. Thank you.
Because in so many ways, it's just beautiful, it's lyrical, it's romantic in the original sense as well as the more popular sense. It's intergenerational, it's mythic, it's epic, it's intelligent, it's just, one for the ages, just like his first book, which then leads me on to Verghese. I think that's how you pronounce his name. How intelligent can one human be? He's a surgeon at Stanford. He's a lecturer. He's a brilliant author. I mean, he's just got too much talent in his toolbox. It's just ridiculous.
I find him utterly loathsome in every possible way.
And he seems like a nice guy from the interviews that I've watched. So going to the story, it's set between 1900 and 1977. It's mainly set in Kerala, India, which is in South India, which is a place surrounded by water. And that leads into the family intergenerational story, which is about a lot of mysterious drownings of family members in and around water, which leads to this big fear. And it's almost this kind of spiritual tone to the whole story. This, almost like a kind of, is it a fairy tale about the family itself, or is it something more logical? And then interspersed with this family drama about that you go through different generations, starting with this wonderfully young girl who's becomes the matriarch of the family, but you meet her first right at the beginning, about to get married to an older man in this area of India, and which you think is a little bit creepy, but actually not. It's a wonderful, lovely love story between the two that blossoms, and they create this amazing family. But there's a lot of tragedy, a lot of trauma that happens, mainly around this kind of drowning or water-based phobia and incident that happens to a lot of different family members. And that interjects the whole story. But then the other part that you kind of get moved into is this student doctor in Glasgow in Scotland who, you hear about his background and why he then ends up in India. So obviously some of the story intertwines and interjects. The only thing I will say is I did listen to the author reading the story, and probably his only flaw is that he cannot do a good Scottish accent. So I was like, what is that accent?
We finally found the chink in his armor.
He is human.
Supposed to be a Scottish accent, and I know Scottish accents very well. And it wasn't a very good one. Sorry, sorry for Gazy. But the whole sense of place that he manages to do reminds me, and I hate to kind of like tie to Indian-based authors, even though I think Verghese is Ethiopian, but his family originates from India. But it reminds me very of Salman Rushdie in that kind of epic flavor. And the whole book is, if the other word I didn't use shimmering, I would use flavorful, because, you just get the sounds and the smells and the sights of this beautiful, wondrous place, makes you want to go there. That is amazing for what he does. The other thing that's interesting is this kind of, for me in particular, this kind of post-colonial nomadic existence, which I know the author feels like, Rushdie feels like too, because he's written about it. But I feel like it too, where you're kind of like, you've been dispersed, your identity's been dispersed among continents. And I get this feeling from him. What he does a great sense of is that the characters too have sort of traveled and been in different places. And you get all these, there's a Swedish doctor who comes into it and is part of the story. So that's interesting to see how he ended up in India. The medical bits themselves are fascinating, and even though Verghese is a surgeon, it is not difficult to understand all the medical parts. The surgery explanations are done so any layman can understand it, but is also interesting and intriguing enough for you to follow the story. It's just brilliant. It's spiritual, it's a fairy tale, it's realistic, it's a love story. It's worth the time and effort to read. How many hundreds of pages?
It's a chunker, but it's so readable.
It is.
It's not a chore at all.
It's not a chore at all.
No.
It's just a beautiful feeling of relaxation almost as you read it.
Seldom do I feel like going, returning back to certainly a modern adult fiction book, and that one I want to reread.
Yeah,
it's seldom that I want to revisit
and
something
it's
that I
different from his first one, but just as accomplished. And the ending, or the way he ties everything together, I didn't quite see coming, but is fantastically done. So just read it. Do yourself a favor.
Well, Gemma brought us a shimmeringly flavorful book this week. Thank you. We got to get that on the cover, on the book jacket. That's shimmeringly flavorful. Raves.
It opens up and it has a chime that happens.
And then you can smell all the kind of the spices of India coming through.
This is a very expensive book.
Not to make light of what sounds like a beautiful book.
It is very beautiful.
So here we are. Moving on to Heidi. And Heidi, I'm sure, brought us something cool, because she always does.
Well, yes, I did. And it pretty much stayed in my wheelhouse of what I like to read. I chose Louder Than Hunger by John Shu. And this is like an upper middle grade YA novel. And a little bit different for me is this book is in verse. So I'm not usually one to read a novel that's in verse. But this one is, and I read it in one sitting. It's a pretty big book, but I just couldn't put it down. It's kind of a retelling of the author's own experiences with anorexia, anxiety, bullying, OCD, and loss. Basically, it's his survival story, which is may seem to be hard to read, but in the end is very beautiful. And it is a story that is you can't find anywhere. You don't find many stories about men with eating disorders.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is about Jake, and Jake is in 7th grade. And Jake is a wonderful kid. He is volunteering at the nursing home. He loves spending time with the people there. He has a wonderful relationship with his grandmother. She likes musicals. He loves musicals. She loves the Golden Girls. She is just a wonderful lady, and he likes to visit her. I believe it's like every Saturday he goes and visits his grandma. But Jake's mom starts noticing that he's wearing bigger clothes and that he seems to be shrinking, like he's swimming in his clothes. And finally decides that maybe he needs to go somewhere and get some help. And during this time, you're like going back, like each chapter is, Jake and like what makes him happy at the beginning. And then you start hearing this voice. And this voice is telling Jake all of these horrible things about himself, that he is repulsive and he is ugly and he is fat and he shouldn't eat. And the voice keeps getting louder and louder and louder. There's a point where the voice, and it's, quote, louder than the hunger in my stomach. Wow. So he is really, really, really struggling with this voice. So he ends up being sent to Whispering Pines, and it's a long journey for Jake. He ends up making some friends, and he sees friends come and go and come back or just go. And he really struggles through this time. He's really kind of, at first, denying the treatment, and like believes there's nothing wrong because the voice is telling him that, you don't need to be treated. So he really struggles with that. And he really, really struggles with not being able to see his grandmother. He is missing his best friend. So, it's a really, really great book. I cried about 10 times, but the journey is wonderful. And it's really, I think it's great to mention that Kate DiCamillo does the foreword in the book.
Oh, nice. There we go.
She is unreal.
Right.
So that definitely caught my attention too.
Yes. And she basically says reading Jake's story will change you. And it really will, because as you read it, I felt kind of the emotions that he was feeling.
Sure.
The words that John Shu chooses to describe what Jake is feeling. Yeah. And obviously, because it's his own personal experience, like he went through this, you feel your emotions tank with how the struggle of trying to get better. And then it's like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Is it uplifting at the end?
It is. I will say, like, I had to finish it. I had to know what happened. And it gets really dark. It's nothing is ever graphic but it does get pretty dark. And Casey has read it too.
Yeah, I read it as well.
But it is uplifting.
Yeah. It's, as you said, it's a story that's not really talked about very much, especially with men. And I like the intergenerational relationships he has. Yeah. And as someone who also has struggled like Jake, I thought it was a very authentic voice. And I recommend it. And there's reason it's getting a lot of awards. Award nods.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about this book. And I think it's, really important to mention that people are always going through stuff, and people are really good at masking at what they go through.
Oh yeah, hiding.
And just because he changed physically, his people who are close to him didn't realize what he was going through mentally. And I think this is a really good depiction on how people are struggling mentally and still seem happy.
Yeah. And he has, on the outside, a happy life. He has a great relationship with his mom, his grandma. Yeah. I think there's a little bullying going on at school.
There is bullying at school, but it still seems to be on the outside handling everything.
Chipping away.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
The choice to do a novel in poetry, basically in verse, frequently can be a bad one. It sounds like this case it's not, because that might be a better way of accessing those emotions you're talking about.
Right.
So,
and it doesn't read like it's in verse a lot. Like you will get chapters where it's his schedule at Whispering Pines. You will get letters, but it is still beautifully done.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that is one heck of a stack of books for you to enjoy, all available here in this particular library and others too, for those of our listeners. And I know you're out there who are not in Cedarburg, Wisconsin. And we are grateful to all of you listeners. And we are grateful also to our friends, the friends of the Cedarburg Public Library, who make things like this possible, shows like this, books like we've talked about. All of that is really the friends are the fuel that fuel the fire that is us.
And one of the ways they fuel the library is their book sale, which will be in the middle of July.
Fantastic.
Stay tuned for that.
Coming up.
Yep.
And
Starts
librarians
the 15th,
have,
I think.
Yep, the 15th, which is a Monday,
Yeah,
right?
Yep.
to
And
the 20th.
in order for us to make room on the shelves for new books, we have to get rid of old books sometimes. And yeah, there's going to be some good steals.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been a weeding fool. So there we go. Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everybody. Keep reading. We will. And as long as we keep reading, that means we'll be back next week. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening to New Book Tuesday.